Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the cost of living and the relative cost of living, and how what type of compensation or payment for work that people would choose, assuming they had the choice. Now, um, I've been inspired by this. I was starting to do a vid on the cost of living, but I saw a video by fellow YouTuber Academic Agent, and it was comparing the standard of living of, say, black slaves in the United States in the 1840s, for example, and comparing them to white day labourers and the standard of living that each had. Also a question that, as I understand it, at least, AA posed to some, I suppose, his viewers and listeners. Would they, if they had a choice, would they select a situation where all their needs were provided, as in the manner of how the slaves were being looked after? That is, free accommodation, free food, free clothing, and a very small amount of change to pursue any personal objectives and so on. But in return for that, of course, they had to provide their labour for as long as the plantation owner demanded it, or until the term of their indenturement had ended. Or would they have that, or would they pick a wage? Would they select a wage and then from that wage have to pay for accommodation and food and so on? So I guess there's apparently a lot of people decided that having their needs provided for was more desirable than getting paid. Now, it depends what you're getting paid. If you're getting just a sort of day labourer type rates, then that's one thing. But if you're a chief executive of a merchant bank, then obviously you'd pick the salary instead of the accommodation and so on. So it varies depending on what job you've got. But if we look at on or about around that sort of average income, then something like half the workforce in the United States, I think, are paid less than $35,000 a year or less. Now, I've done some numbers here on, say, accommodation or on cost of living. And I'll use Sydney as an example. Now, Sydney's a big city. It's quite expensive. It's got some of the most expensive real estate in the world, because they allow big Chinese and offshore investors and the big merchant banks to come in and buy up swathes of property, private residential property that otherwise would be available to people who just want a place to live and bring up their family and so on. But those people are being squeezed out for the big tycoon investors. There are some of these Chinese property investors. They own 200-300 properties apiece in fucking Sydney. That's how bad it is. But because the politicians are they got in early, they knew they were going to be bringing in masses of migrants for decades. They knew that. They didn't tell us, but they knew it. So they went out and bought up, shitloads of real estate themselves with the open assistance and help of these big banks and the big end of town financially. So these politicians have made squillions of dollars. Politicians that would be worth, $1 or $2 million under other circumstances are now worth 20, 30, 40 million bucks, all from real estate investments. And these people are pretty stupid. There's no way they're smart enough to do this and make serious money. They just riding on the coattails. It's insider trading. Let's call it what it is. It's insider trading. So they've got no desire to stop it or to rein it in or anything like that. But anyway, the cost of living has gone insane across the Western world. It's an orchestrated globalist thing. It's nothing natural or organic about it, nothing at all. But if you live in Sydney, just to cover the cost of housing, this assumes like a 2-bedroom apartment in a middle of the middle class sort of area. And so and it would be an ordinary apartment, probably no garage or anything like that. Maybe not even internal laundry. So you're going to have to go to the local laundromat and then leave your car, assuming you've even got one, parked on the road. Now, to pay the rent and to put food on the table and to clothe yourself, and this is pretty minimal. Now, this assumes, by the way, no entertainment. You're never going out to eat. You're not going out to get a cup of coffee or to have a beer or something like that. You're doing nothing, and it assumes that you don't need to pay for any transport to go to work. So again, you've got no car. You don't have to pay to use a bus or a train or something like that. You can walk around the corner to your job, or that's the assumption. Now, that being the case, you need to have a gross income. That's the total amount of income before tax and social security and all that sort of stuff's deducted. You need to have about just a couple of $1,000s below what's listed as the average wage for Sydney. So you need just on the average wage. Now, again, that's before you've done anything. If no doctor's bills, if you get sick or something, none of that's covered here. Now, if we make another sort of provision for those sorts of things, and assuming even a minimal amount of entertainment, assuming you've got a job where you've got to travel downtown or something like that, so you're going to need to use public transport for that. So you add that in, and then before you know it, you're looking at around 127% of the average wage. Now, that's just to live quite a basic lifestyle. You're not doing anything ritzy. There's no annual vacation baked into that one. You've got enough money to pay the rent, buy clothes, put food on the table. You can have one modest night out per fortnight. You really can't afford anything in the way of alcohol, maybe one beer a week, that type of thing. So again, we're talking quite a frugal existence here. No vacations. You can't afford to run a car or something on that rate. So that gives you an idea of the cost of living in that. That assumes you live on your own, obviously. But so if you want to and rent's your biggest expense. So if you want to do something about that, you've got to share your place. You've got to have roommates and people like that. So maybe you're, or maybe you've got a partner like your wife or husband or boyfriend, something like that. So someone else needs to live there to share the rent. And you could probably have 3 people there, say, you and your partner plus someone in the spare room, perhaps, and then you would start to economically, things would start to work out. Now, let's suppose that you were offered the option of someone providing all of those things for you, and under some sort of long-term agreement, so they can't just turf you out or fire you or something like that. So you're kind of locked together. You have to stay to do the work, and they have to keep you there to honour the arrangement insofar as the accommodation they're providing and the food and so on. But if you've got all that provided, I think a lot of people would accept that. It's only when you start getting into, say, double the average wage that you're really in a situation where you've got the discretion to live life and not just exist day to day, which is, the lower you are down the income ladder, that's the more it is. But the more you have that discretion, to buy what car you want and to where you go for vacation, and whether you go on a 3-star vacation or a 4-star vacation and so on. So now, if we look at the amount of people that are on double the average wage and above, you're looking at somewhere around 20% of the workforce is getting paid that sort of money. So that's only 2 in 10. So we can safely say that as many as 8 out of 10 people could technically, just on the pure economics of it, nothing else, would pick or would select the situation where they had all their needs provided. Now, the 2 out of 10 who've got the higher wages. Again, they want, you know, to be able to make the individual decisions and so on. But something that Academic Agent came up with is that the slaves, you know, on a dollar for dollar sort of mouthful of food to roof on head to so on, they had a better quality of life in many ways than a white labourer would at the same time, who had to pay everything out of their own wages. So, you know, a lot of these people, they didn't own a house, or, you know, they had nothing. They just rented a bed for 8 hours out of the 24, and that's a bed that someone else has just slept in. There's no one's changing the sheets or putting clean sheets on there. That's it. So that bed is used 24/7 and just has different people in it at any time. You don't know who's been there and where they've been, for goodness sake. So it's a very poor quality of life for those people, and the amount of money they get left over is quite meagre. And when you look at the sort of the health situation of this is, you know, Industrial Revolution type stuff, the health of most of the people in the cities, it was very poor. They had a much higher standard of living when they were living in the rural areas and living on agricultural land. They're all packed in to these factories and in these unclean and unpleasant, overcrowded living conditions, and no wonder there were outbreaks of all sorts of things. So it's something to think about there. What would people choose in the event they had that choice? Now, with the universal basic income, that choice may be thrust upon many of us. I don't know what do we all go on the universal basic income? Will that be forced on us? Well, only some people under a certain wage go on it, and so on. So I don't know how that would go out. Having a look at the mass migration of black and brown peasants into the West, something that certainly happens in Sydney is you can have anywhere up to 20 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment. Now that's meant to be illegal, but the authorities just look the other way. I'm sure if white people did it, they'd be in all sorts of trouble. But because brown and black people do it, the authorities just pretend it's not happening, just look the other way. Sometimes you get raids happening, and I've seen a couple of these raids in progress where immigration agents come in and you see people jumping over fences and off balconies and everything. It's mainly Chinese from what I've seen, but I'm sure there are others involved. And then next day you see a pile of mattresses, 3 meters high, piled on outside the place. And these apartments are owned by Chinese gangster type investors who've put these people up there to work in sweatshop type conditions and so on. And that's how they treat the Indians and the Chinese, the Indians to work in take out food shops and all that sort of thing, Chinese to work in the Chinese restaurants and to do manicuring. They put them in these places and then they pay them and say that most of their pay is actually taken up by rent, accommodation and food and clothing. So these people supply those needs, but take it out of their pay, and they effectively end up with close to nothing. And they get one sort of group outing a week or a fortnight somewhere or other, to maybe go somewhere that's probably still owned by the same Chinese goon squad as the properties are owned by. So already the Chinese and the Indians and the Filipinos, these sort of people who come over en masse to the West or certainly to Australia, they're already being processed through that system of effectively slavery and long-term indenturement, where they don't get paid, but they just get the other stuff. Now, compared to how, especially if they're the rural peasants, how they had it in China or India or any of those places, they've got it actually pretty good. The quality of the accommodation be far in excess of anything they'd have known where they came from. The idea of a regular meals and that sort of stuff, and clean white sheets, and all those sorts of things. That's just something that it would be a huge novelty to them. The idea of being able to walk out of the place and be at work in a few moments, and with all these facilities, all these Western, clean, on time, orderly Western facilities around. This would be something they'd never have seen before, and would be agog. So to them, it's not such a bad gig. They may not like it, and if they don't like it or cause any trouble or ask too many questions, their relatives back home will find themselves in a lot of trouble, and these people are reminded of that. So it is tantamount to modern day slavery. But again, the Western governments just look away and pretend it's not happening. But they're already being socialized into that system, that in effect the globalists want for the rest of us. You'll own nothing and be happy. You'll live in a pod and all that sort of stuff. Now, given that the amount of people who in the West who can afford to live a first world lifestyle, or a middle class first world lifestyle, is diminishing by the day. So as cost of living goes up and wages aren't anywhere near keeping up, then the amount of people who can live a first world lifestyle, middle class lifestyle, and in Sydney at least, the middle class lifestyle begins at around $2.25 million. That's the entry level for a house. That's where middle class now begins in Sydney. It used to begin at, in 1968, middle class lifestyle would begin at like $10,000 entry level for a house. Now it's like $2.25+ million. But that's where it is now. And if you can't play at that level, you're not middle class. And if you exist if below that. If you're below that level, you exist day to day. Whether you're grimly and desperately hanging on, trying to get through the mortgage or whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's only at that level where you can afford that sort of house and afford a couple of $100,000 minimum of motor car in the driveway. And if you can't do that, you're not in the middle class in Sydney anymore. So and the amount of people who can afford that's like 1% of the population. There's just, other than, say, putting aside things like inheritance, for example. But so that's the thing there. So I head over to Academic Agent's channel and have a look at that video or that presentation he's done. It's quite good and certainly worth a look. And it should open up your mind to the idea of the majority of the white working population in the first fucking world at the moment, in the advanced Western world, has been reduced to such a state where they're worse off than slaves were in the United States in the 1840s. Just ponder that, if you will. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.